This is Politics of the Internet Y490. This lecture was originally delivered on January 18, 2012. There are three ways of defining the Internet. There's a technical way, which is as a network of networks. There's a comparative way in which the Internet is considered to be an infrastructure, a particular kind of net infrastructure called a network infrastructure, similar to a railroad, telegraph system, a telephone network, a radio or TV broadcasting network. And the third way of defining the Internet is as a social entity, a kind of virtual community created by the people interacting on the network. When we think about different types of network infrastructures, there are a bunch of variables. There can be more or less centralized control. Ownership can be public or private, or some mix thereof. There can be various degrees of interactivity enabled on the infrastructure. Some network infrastructures are basically one-to-one, such as the telephone network, and there are others that are one-to-many. Most broadcasting networks are like that. Finally, in different networks, there may be a different role for user-created content. So we'll talk about that later. There's been a rapid growth in the use of the Internet. This graph on the left shows the growth in number of users from 1995 to 2010. As of 2010, the greatest number of new users were in Asia, followed by Europe, North America, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Oceania, Australia. Some very important questions for the study of the politics of the Internet is how does the diffusion of power, how does the diffusion of information and communications technologies affect the distribution of power and vice versa? Who are the winners and losers with the diffusion of this technology? Can the losers catch up or be compensated for their losses, and how can winners be prevented from becoming too powerful? In the textbook that we used by Andrew Chadwick, there are a bunch of concepts discussed which have to do with technological determinism versus social shaping of technology, decentralization and disintermediation, participation and apathy in politics, community building versus online echo chambers, and globalization. There are at least three authors who've used ideas of technological determinism, that is the view that technologies have an inherent character that cannot be altered or denied, and that determine how they will be used and how they affect society. Examples of works of this sort are Jacques Ellul's The Technological Society, Tom Friedman's The World is Flat, and Raymond Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near. Under the social shaping of technology viewpoint, which is different from technological determinism, these authors believe that the society shapes technology rather than the reverse. There are many in this group who belong to what's called the Irvine School. Authors in this area include Langdon Winner, Bruno Latour, Stephen Woolgar, and Rob Kling. Larry Lessig's book deals with the original book was Code 1.0, then he did a second version called Code 2.0. Basic idea is that code includes software and hardware, that it's basically about the architecture for information technology, and that this architecture determines what people can do with it. There are basically four themes: regulability, regulation by code, latent ambiguities in free speech rights and intellectual property rights, and competing sovereigns, which means that the law embodied in the Internet's code competes with the law established by Congress, the bureaucracy, and the courts. John Perry Barlow is one of the key advocates of what some people call cyber anarchy or cyber. It's the kind of well, I'll just talk about it. The key author here is John Perry Barlow, who was a former lyricist for the Grateful Dead. wrote an essay in 1996 after the passage of the Communications Decency Act, which was part of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. The beginning of the document is, quote, "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather." Basically, cyberspace libertarians say that government cannot regulate cyberspace, that cyberspace is self-ordered, that no government can survive without it, and that the state will wither away as a result of the above. Larry Lessig argues that the architecture of the Internet is fully compatible with extensive regulation and top-down control, and quite in contrary to the cyberspace libertarian view. A good example of this is the control of the Internet in China, where there are, for example, big mama monitors in Internet cafes, where basically one person can monitor what everybody's doing in the Internet cafe and can report them if they're engaging in infractions of the law. There is no permission for anonymous websites or anonymous email addresses in China. People can get around that to some degree, but you can be prosecuted for the use of anonymity. And public expressions of dissent via the Internet are strictly controlled. A good example of that recently was some restrictions on microblogging in China. We also have, as a key concept, the idea of disintermediation, which is that the impact of the Internet allows people to bypass intermediaries, allowing individuals to directly access people and institutions they wish to contact. So, for example, you can engage in online stock trading without the use of a stockbroker. You can go directly to web news sources without purchasing or subscribing to a newspaper. You can send messages directly to somebody as long as you have their email address, sort of bypassing the mail system. Another possibility is that with the Internet, the introduction of the Internet, you have disintermediation and then reintermediation, so that there still is some value to replace raw content with mediated content, edited content. Blogs sort of take the place of newspaper editorial boards. Record companies can still sell their music piece by piece on web services like iTunes. Companies like Amazon are basically becoming the bookstores for the brick and mortar bookstores that used to dominate book sales. So another area of concern is the impact of the Internet on democracy. Some democratic systems like the U.S. have experienced a decline in political participation and a rise in political apathy. So the question is whether the introduction of information technologies can change this trend. Also, if that would be, whether or not that would be a good thing. One of the arguments put forth by Cass Sunstein in his book Republic.com is that the Internet creates a great possibility for the creation of online echo chambers. That is, that people will search out news, only that news or that content which is compatible with their pre-existing views. Therefore, they will limit their exposure to views that are not consistent with their attitudes and opinions. That would obviously be a loss in terms of public dialogue and debate. Finally, in Chadwick's book, there's some discussion of the globalizing effects of the Internet, basically because the Internet was designed to be inherently global, not respecting very much national boundaries. This made it somewhat distinctive from other kinds of, particularly network technologies.